When it comes to retirement, do you want to have the same old plan everyone else has? Of course not. You're unique and have your own goals and dreams. Don't be treated like a number. This is your retirement. So it's time to think differently. And you're in luck because you found the Retire Your Way podcast with Dave Lopez, founder and managing member of ILG Financial. At ILG Financial, you won't find generic run-of-the-mill plans containing the same old cookie-cutter solutions. Dave and the ILG Financial team focus on building one retirement plan at a time using their Think Differently philosophy. And that means your own comprehensive plan with customized solutions built to achieve just one goal, yours. So put on your Think Differently hat and get ready to take back control of your retirement today and for all the tomorrows to come. ILG Financial's Retire Your Way podcast was created just for you, and it's starting right now. Coming to you from the ILG Financial Studios, this is Retire Your Way, the podcast that gives you the straight talk and honest answers that you need to help you achieve your financial goals through smart investing and careful planning. My name is Jeff Shade, and as always, I'm just here to ask the questions. But the words of wisdom and solid advice come from Dave Lopez, managing member and owner of ILG Financial. How you doing today, Dave?
I am doing great, and it's sure good to be back on the show with you, Jeff. I really enjoy this time with you, and we get such great feedback from the clients and the listeners as to the information. So we're looking forward to another great show.
Yeah, always glad to be with you too, Dave. As I said many times, I learned so much, and I hope our listeners do too. And once again, I want to remind them that if you've missed our previous podcast, they are available for you. And of course, if you missed any part of this podcast, that's the beauty of podcasts, is that you can play them all over again. Well, Dave, you guys are prolific writers there at ILG. You in particular, understand that you just had an article published in Kiplinger. What's that all about?
Oh, we did. Boy, we're so proud of it. It just turned out in Kiplinger last week, or early this week, I believe. By the way, if anybody wants that article, if you just reach out to the office, we can send you over a copy. But it's interesting, Jeff. I wrote this article for my children. My children are in their 20s, like many of our listeners' kids and grandkids, and they're just getting into the workforce. And, no one's walked them through financial education, how to prepare for retirement. And we've got the benefit of what we do is we deal with folks at the other end, right? They're, 5 to 7 years from retirement or in retirement. And the number one thing I hear from folks who meet with me for the first time is, why didn't someone tell us this when we were 20 or 30? What we could have done if someone had told us about this. So that prompted us to write this article, and the article is about buying lunch out, right? Because the kids do that. They go to work now that they got a job, and then they go to Panera, and it's how much does your lunch cost? And what we talk about in this article, and you know me, I'm a math geek, is we literally break down the true cost of a lunch if you were to do it 5 days a week for 40 years while you were working, as opposed to taking that money and putting it in a 401k as an example, and getting matching contributions from your employer if you did, and the end result is truly astounding. But the real message of the article, which I'm real excited for the listeners to read, is that to be aware that what the media and the marketing media sends a message to everybody, and we see it in everything that comes across TV and radio, that you deserve a break, you deserve a new car, treat yourself, it's what you deserve. It only costs a few pennies to get this cup of coffee and treat yourself. But the reality is, what they don't want you to know is the exact opposite, which is if you using compound interest and the magic of compounding and savings, when you look back, a lunch that you think only costs you $10 or $11 a day could end up be costing as much as $190 from your future retirement. And the message to the kids is, if you knew this lunch cost $190, would you bring a bag lunch?
I would think so. Boy, you just about knocked me off my seat there. $10 or $11. I remember when $5 was a lot for lunch. But the other thing I think to consider is that not only do people buy lunch out, but a lot of people are stopping by places like Starbucks for coffee. And, a cup of coffee with a tip and all, I mean, you're looking at probably $5 or so, and you compound that along with a lunch. And boy, you've got a pretty sound retirement going for you there.
No, you absolutely do. And we're actually, some people said that. They said, I don't know if I spend $11 for lunch. Well, the $11 is one trip to Panera and just getting a salad and a drink. You're over $11. I think you're close to 14.
Wow.
But it's the same at the other places. But you're right. Some folks might say, well, I just go to McDonald's and I spend $8. But then they also stop at the convenience store on the way to work or at Starbucks and drop another $6 just on a a donut and a coffee. So what it turns out, when we get people to actually count it, we are literally looking at, on average, $14 to $20 a day on coffee, a quick snack, and a lunch, times 5 days a week, which they don't know this now, but times 40 years. And if you just invested that money, you would have a huge savings. But it gets better than that, because if you can take advantage of matching in a 401k, some or all of that money is doubled if it goes into a 401k, and then it compounds for 40 years, and it's truly staggering. The whole message of the article, of course, is the power of compounding by investing early and continuing that over your lifetime as opposed to getting started later. So it's a great article, very proud of it. If you've got anybody that you know who's under 40 years old and buys lunch out or stops at Starbucks or something, you want them to get a hold of this article, and we'll be glad to get you a copy. So please take a look out for it on our website. And if you're following our e-newsletters that come out every week, we're going to be promoting it. If you're not getting the e-newsletters, please reach out to the office and let's get you on that list. Every week we have great information like this podcast, all relevant to your retirement. So take advantage, please.
Good work there, Dave. I want to talk about another article on our podcast that you've recently written, and it is about Biden's tax changes. I'll do a little quote here. At the beginning, Joe Biden said, "I'm going to get rid of the bulk of Trump's $2 trillion tax cut." And a lot of you may not like that, but I'm going to close loopholes like capital gains and stepped-up basis. Now, the era or high taxation could arrive with a Biden presidency next year, or with another progressive in about 5 years. How does this potential change affect those entering or near retirement, Dave?
Well, they're huge changes, and this article will address them one by one. What I'd like to do today, Jeff, if you're up to it, is we're just going to address a few of them. For time's sake, we can't get into too much detail and still stay in our time block, but then it's a good primer. If anyone wants more information, just reach out to us and get the article. But here's the takeaway. It doesn't matter with respect to what we're discussing, which is your economic future, has nothing to do with our political beliefs. So this article has nothing to do with political beliefs and who's right and who's wrong and who's moral and who's amoral. My job as your financial advisor and as a math geek is to say, if the progressives win control of the House and the Senate and the presidency, if the progressives win control of the legislature, the House and the Congress and the presidency, their political agenda, their economic agenda is going to have repercussions for you as an individual. And right or wrong, that's going to happen, just like rain falling. So what we want to do is be aware of what their agenda is and actually break down how it might affect you as an individual. And the next question would be the obvious one, is now that I know what could happen, are there steps I can take to minimize any negative effect to my accounts and to my lifestyle and my quality of life in retirement? Now, the good news is the progressive movement is very candid about what they want to do, and we're going to talk about that today in the podcast. So we can break down, and we've done that in the article, and we'll do a little today, what that would mean for an individual in or nearing retirement. And then we can, from there, build out solutions to minimize the negative effects. So that's a long-winded answer to your start of the question. So I'm going to jump right into what your questions were, Jeff. You had said, how does the potential change affect those in, near, or entering retirement? Well, one way is most of the folks in retirement, since you're no longer working and getting raises, you're on a fixed income now, whether it's fixed with a pension and a Social Security check, or for many people, it's just your Social Security checks and money coming out of your IRAs and 401ks to complement your Social Security, but it's a fixed income. Now, some of those incomes may have a cost of living adjusted, but anyone who's getting them, Jeff, knows that the cost of living adjustments don't keep up with true inflation. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, they've been, I think this time for Social Security, it's going to be less than 1% next year. We'll wait and see.
Right, and ask anybody who goes to the grocery store, and they will tell you that food is going up more than under 1%. So when we talk about cost of living adjustments, that's still, for all intents and purposes, you're on a fixed level income coming in. So the challenge will be, based on some of these proposals that the progressives and Biden are making, he basically just told you he's going to roll back the tax decreases. So taxes are going to go up across the board, which means, and this is just the math, you will be taxed more, you will get less money on your fixed income, so you will have less money to pay your bills. So that's the first one. The other one is a trickle down, right? Higher taxes could also have a negative impact, and we'll talk about why in the show, on the stock market and on dividend growth, because he's promised to start taxing corporations more. Well, the direct response to that is either prices go up on their products or the value of their stocks go down because their growth is going to be stunted by the higher taxes, or dividends go down, or both. So if you have money invested in the market, you could see a negative effect directly to your accounts because of these intrusive high tax drags on corporations. The third thing is this, again, we're talking about the drag on the corporate level. It will slow gross domestic product in the country, and multinational companies are going to have an advantage. So you will start to see what happened about 8 years ago, which is companies, actually multinational companies that are based in the U.S., leaving the U.S. and putting up headquarters in more tax-friendly countries, which will affect our gross domestic product and will also affect our tax base, which could be a downward spiral, right? Less taxes. Now they've got to raise taxes anymore because we've got less people. So there are some effects that are going to affect us as retirees. The good news is there's steps you can take if you see this coming.
We're talking about Mr. Biden's tax plan here on Retire Your Way with Dave Lopez. And I think that it is inevitable, Dave, that even if the current president does remain in office, taxes are going to go up. If not sooner, they will later. And I want to talk specifically about what Mr. Biden is proposing. But for our new listeners, I want to let them know that you do have the opportunity for a no-cost, no-obligation plan with Dave here at ILG Financial. You can get that by contacting the office. It is very simple to do. 540-720-5656. 540-720-5656. You can also request your plan online at ilgfinancial.com. If you don't have a plan, of course, Dave will get you on a plan or help you get on a plan. Maybe you just want some questions answered. That's okay, too. You want a second or a third opinion. All those things you can have done with no cost, no obligation at ILG Financial. Once again, take advantage of this opportunity for a no cost, no obligation plan by calling 540-720-5656. All right, Dave, let's talk about Mr. Biden's tax plan here. Exactly what is he proposing?
Okay, the first thing he said in your quote was as clear as can be. He said, I'm going to get rid of the bulk of Trump's $2 trillion tax cut. So the first thing we are very confident is going to happen is Trump, when he came into office, President Trump, he reduced the tax rates really across the board. We're a stair-stepped tax code in the U.S. So, some of your money is taxed right now at 0%, some at 10, some at 12, some at 22, then 24, and so on. The top tax bracket right now is about 36%, I believe. So when that law went into effect with President Trump, it had what's called a sunset clause. So sunset clause just means that they agreed that this was going to be in effect through 2025. And then at the end of 2025, it would go away and taxes would revert back to the previous higher tax rates across the board. So what that means is that for Biden to do literally nothing, if Congress doesn't take any action in 2026, taxes will automatically go up to the pre-President Trump era. What that means is the top tax bracket will go up from roughly 36 to as much as 39.5. And then all the other brackets that we're all in are all going to go up a couple points as well. So we're going to see an immediate tax hike. Another thing he proposes, he wants to start taxing all dividends and capital gains at the ordinary income rate. Now, what that means is right now, if you own a stock, let's say that you bought stock years ago, Coke stock, let's take Coke, Jeff, and you bought it for $10, and you've held it for years and years and years, and it's done well, and now that Coke stock is worth $100. You bought it for $10, it's now worth $100. You haven't really paid any tax on that gain yet. When you sell that stock under current tax law, you'll show a gain of $90. Are you with me?
Yes.
Right? So you sold it for $100. You don't have to pay tax on the $10 you bought it for. Your gain, your capital gain, is $90. Well, under current law, the government opposes a lower tax rate on capital gains, long-term capital gains. Depending on how much money you're making and bringing in, it can be as little as zero right now. Most folks are in what's called a 15% bracket for capital gains, and then the highest is 20% currently. So you're going to pay 20% or less on that $90. So 20% on 90 is about $18 in tax. Well, what former Vice President Biden wants to do, Jeff, is get rid of capital gains tax altogether, which means when you sell your Coke stock, that $90 is taxed exactly like your income's taxed, ordinary income tax. Well, that's much higher. For most people, they're in a 22% or 24% or up to 33 or 36% tax bracket. So it's very reasonable that the tax on the sale of your stocks, that also applies to the sale of any real estate, could double, and that's a problem. Okay, so he's specifically addressed capital gains tax. This could lead to exactly what people would think of if you're thinking what the repercussions. People could start to sell their stocks in mass before this new tax law takes effect, which that in itself could cause the market to have severe drops. So we want to be monitoring this very close. If ever you plan to take your gains, you might want to take it before you lose your capital gains tax limited tax benefit.
So with this trillions of dollars of stimulus here, of course, taxes had to go up at some point in time. And instead of, I guess, kicking the tax can down the road more, Mr. Biden proposes going ahead and maybe taking a little bit of a chunk out of that right now with some changes. Let's continue to talk about Mr. Biden's proposed tax changes. Dave, I understand another one is the elimination of something called the step up in basis. What's that all about?
Yeah, boy, this is a huge one, and it's going to affect more people than you know. The step up in basis basically means that I'm going to go back to that Coke stock since we're used to talking about the Coke stock. So, Jeff, you bought the stock at $10. It's now worth $100. If you don't sell the stock, you don't have to pay tax on the gain currently. So you could avoid the tax by not selling it, but of course if you don't sell it, you don't get to enjoy the money. But a lot of people don't want to sell it because they don't want to pay the tax, and they've decided, you know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold it forever, and then I'm going to give it to my kids as inheritance. And the reason they do that is because they're going to pass on money to their kids anyway. This is an excellent asset to pass on to your children for tax reasons, because when you pass stock to your heirs, it works the same thing with mutual funds. Actually, it works exactly the same with real estate too. Your child inherits the asset with a step up in basis. And what I mean by that is your basis is just a fancy financial word, Jeff, for the amount you paid for the asset, because you don't have to pay tax on that. In this case with Coke, it was your $10. So if you bought the Coke for $10, you're going to sell it for $100. Your basis is $10. Your sale price is $100. Your gain is $90. So if you don't sell that stock, you pass away and your son inherits the Coke stock. Under current law, he can sell that stock the day after you die for $100, and he pays no tax because when he inherits it, the basis steps up, increases from the $10 you paid to the price of the stock on the date of your death. It's a great way to pass assets to your heirs so that we can avoid tax. So in that example, you would have in theory been able to hold your Coke stock, watch it go up in value, had it available for you in an emergency if you needed it, continued to collect dividends on the Coke stock. Now, you would have paid tax on the dividends, but then pass it on to your kids, and your kids could sell it and never pay tax on the gain. It's a wonderful deal. Same thing with your real estate. You could own a piece of rental property, collect rent for your whole life, have a gain of $200,000-$300,000. When you die, your kid inherits the rental property. He can keep it, or he could sell it and not pay any tax on the gain on the property. That's called step up in basis. Well, Biden has said he wants to get rid of that. So what that means is that when your son inherits that Coke stock, he's going to have to pay ordinary income tax, because remember, he's also getting rid of capital gains tax, right? He's going to pay ordinary income tax. So if your son and his wife are making money, it's likely they're in the 24% tax bracket plus 5% state. They're losing 30% of their money to taxes. They inherit this Coke stock, and they've got to pay 30% of it or more tax on that $90. So instead of paying $18, is I think what we estimated you were going to do, they might have to pay $27 to $30 of that $90 or more. Because remember, if taxes go up, then you're going to get less of that gain. So step up in basis is a huge one. I want to make a point about this too. Right now, on his current proposals, Biden has said he only wants to do this on people making $400,000 or more. But one of the things you're going to have to make a bet, and I can give you my opinion, Jeff, but I would ask you, if you look back historically, both Republican and Democrat, as to changes where they raised taxes or lowered cost of living adjustments or anything like that that was going to affect you negatively, and it was like a first step. Historically, when you look back, did they ever stop there?
No, they really didn't. If history, proves itself in the future, it's not going to stop there.
No, we've got a great story here in Virginia where they needed money, but temporarily, because they needed to build a toll road. So the plan was, we're going to build this road and we're going to charge tolls to pay for the cost. And once it's paid off, it's a free road like every other road for everybody in the state. Well, wouldn't you know, it's no surprise. That was the promise. Once the debt was paid off, they decided to keep the toll as a toll road forever because they had other uses for the money. And we see that's the same with everything. So what we have seen historically is when you see the politicians moving in a certain direction with a first step, it's usually a first step for the wealthy only, just to make everybody feel good about doing it. And then very quickly, it will become a rule of thumb for everyone. For example, when Social Security was initiated by Roosevelt, he made a promise to the American public, and that promise was your Social Security will never, ever be taxed. Ever. Now, anyone who's receiving Social Security knows they're up to 85% of their Social Security is subject to ordinary income tax now. And what happened is it has happened just like these Biden proposals in stages. First, they said, listen, because of unprecedented times, you're used to hearing that term, for those making more money are going to have to pay 50% tax on 50% of their Social Security. And then later on, the next presidency said, hey, those people have to pay 50, but then some people have to pay not 50, but 85% is taxable income. So it's always, you have to see these moves as first steps, and you have to assume for your safety that what applies to the rich only today is going to apply to you tomorrow. And step up in basis could drastically affect your retirement and legacy planning. So you want to get in, meet with me, and we want to take steps. If you're planning to pass on real estate or stocks or mutual funds to your children or your heirs, and you're betting on a step up in basis or you're betting on capital gains tax, we want to make some tweaks to your plan to minimize the hit of a progressive movement.
It occurs to me, Dave, that a lot of people inherit homes from parents who pass away, and many times the parents have owned those homes for 25, 30, maybe 40 years or so with real estate appreciation. I mean, if someone paid $30,000 for a home and it's worth $500,000 today, that is going to be quite a bite right there as far as the tax bill goes. So, yeah, you're right. This is something to really consider, step up in basis. But if I'm not incorrect here, Dave, I think you said, does this apply to people only making $400,000 or more, or does it apply to everyone across the board?
Right now, the proposal is for only people making $400,000 or more. But here's what's insidious about that. Even if that's what they stick to, which I don't believe they will, imagine if your parents bought a house, Jeff. My grandmother bought her house for $26,000. Right. When she passed, she sold the house for $450,000. She held it her whole life. Well, what's the gain? $425,000. So right. If that happened and this new law, if I or my dad had inherited her house, that year I would have been a $400,000 earner. You see how tricky it is? People think it's only the wealth because they think, well, I only make $100,000 a year. That's not me. That's not you this year. But when you inherit the stock or when you inherit the property, that year you're a $400,000 earner because of the gains, right. Which means now because of the gains, now you own a ridiculous amount of stock on it. So they've been doing this, by the way, for years. When you hear the government talk, for years you've heard politicians say, we're raising tax rates, but don't worry, only on the upper two tax brackets, just for the wealthy, right? Mm-hmm. The reason they do that is most Americans say, well, if it doesn't affect me, I think it's a great idea. Are you with me?
Yeah. But
here's what they don't tell you. After I say this, you may think back to some of the political debates, and this might ring true to you as well. Often usually it was the Progressive Party that says we're raising taxes on the top 10% of the wealthy, the top two tax brackets. And then what you'll hear is from the Conservative Party, they'll say, listen, we've done the math. There is not enough wealthy people that even if you raise the taxes to the levels you want, it's going to barely make a dent in the debt because there's just not a lot of that group. So it really would beg the question, Jeff, if the math from the conservative side is accurate, which it is, the question is, why would you make such a political push to tax the wealthy if it's going to have very little dent in the debt? Right. Well, the answer is because they know what you don't know, which is they're not concerned with the wealthy's ongoing income. They're after the biggest bucket of money in the history of the world, and that's the 401k, TSP, and IRA bucket. That money is set up to be taxed when you die or when you withdraw it. And most folks don't want to pay taxes, so if they don't need the money, they're going to leave it in there till they die, and your kids are going to inherit the money. And when they inherit the money, they're going to have to pay tax on that bucket, and the year they take that money out, for that 1 year, maybe 1 year in their life, Jeff, catapult them into that top tax bracket. See, so when the government wants to raise taxes on just the upper 2 tax brackets, what they're trying to do is get your heirs and tax your 401k and IRA at a high tax bracket that 1 year so that they can get their hands on that big pool of money.
We're speaking with Dave Lopez of ILG Financial about Joe Biden's proposed tax increases if he becomes president. Once again, for our listeners to this podcast, if you'd like a no-cost, no-obligation financial plan with Dave, a chance to sit down, ask some questions, maybe get a first plan, a second opinion, or even a third opinion, you can do that no cost, no obligation by calling this number, 720-5656 here at area code 540. It's 540-720-5656. You can also request that online at ilgfinancial.com. Once again, we're talking about Biden tax changes and what they mean to you in terms of higher taxes. This is part of an article that Dave has written. Once again, if you would like to get a chance to take a look at this article, if you'd like to get this article for yourself, you can do that by going to ilgfinancial.com, asking for it there. You could also call 720-5656 if you want. We'll send that article out to you. Dave has this article and another one in Kiplinger. And of course, always there's great information on the website at ilgfinancial.com in terms of educational material. Okay, so what to do about all of this? We're going to cover that in our next podcast, Dave. Right now, we're out of time for this week. For Dave Lopez, I'm Jeff Shade. Have a great day, won't you? Thank you for listening to us, and be sure to join us again next time for another edition of Retire Your Way. The information provided is for educational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice for any individual or entity. All information contained herein is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. The views presented today are those of Dave Lopez and not necessarily represent the views of AlphaStar Capital Management, LLC. The opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your financial professional before executing any financial strategy. Investment advisory services offered through AlphaStar Capital Management, LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. SEC registration does not constitute an endorsement of the firm by the Commission, nor does it indicate that the advisor has attained a particular level of skill or ability. AlphaStar and ILG Financial, LLC are independent entities.